Heidi hey, Heidi ho, folks, and a good rah-rah to you. This is Carl Franklin, and you're listening to another stellar episode of .NET Rocks. I'm your host, Carl Franklin, as always in New London, Connecticut, and my co-host, this time in Atlanta, Georgia, back home in the state of red clay. Mark
Ain't
Dunn.
that the truth, my friend? It is the state of red clay.
Yeah, I just heard that on the radio today. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I just got back from Washington, D.C., so I spent the week up there.
Sorry to hear that.
Had some excellent crab cakes, though.
You had some good crab cakes?
Yeah, awesome crab cakes.
Yeah, that's true. Maryland, Washington, good crab cakes.
Yeah, I went down to a restaurant called Seaside in Glen Burnie, Maryland. And, I was up there teaching a class for Anne Arundel Community College, so really had a good week.
Very cool.
Yeah, we did some cool stuff. It wasn't my typical .NET class that I teach, every other week or so. So I went up and taught a class for them on implementing campus network solutions using SQL 2000 and BizTalk 2002.
Wow.
So we did some cool stuff. I had one student had a PhD in physics, so he and I clicked right off the bat. But we wound up using a DTS package to basically execute a query that pulled using 4XML some data from a table. DTS put that data into a message queue, and then we wrote a BizTalk receive function that picked the data up and processed it ultimately into a flat file format that he was looking for. So he got a lot out of the class. He left ready to do some programming when he got home.
Wow, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was, man. I love BizTalk. BizTalk is a great product.
What's cool about BizTalk is you get to be creative with it,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is ultimately Elmer's glue
right
for your applications. You can tie just about anything together with BizTalk.
Well, just getting back to the clay thing, I was listening to some James Brown, and he said something like, something about the red clay of Georgia. And I guess that's, that's what they eat down there when things get bad, huh?
Yeah, that's right. You just fry some up with a little butter, and it's good.
I mean, there's Poe, and then there's dirt eating Poe, Anyway, Mark, we got some great mail that I really want to take a few minutes and read some of this stuff. We get letters and email all the time, but they've been sticking out lately. And I just wanted to take a few minutes and give a couple of shout-outs here.
Yeah.
Got some... Sorry?
Said yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this one's from Rob Windsor, who says, Hi, Carl and Mark. .NET rocks. Love the show. I was listening to the most recent No Guest show where you mentioned an exercise you had in a class that asked the attendees to extract email addresses from a string. I was just working with the system.text.regularExpressions namespace, and I thought this would be freaking easy in .NET. Took me about 5 minutes to come up with a method, see below, that given a string, it will give you an array of strings with extracted email addresses. I've attached a sample app that does the same from a doc RTF for text file. Thanks again for the show and for helping to get such valuable information out to the developer community. And he actually gave me the code.
That's awesome.
It's pretty cool. I haven't run it yet, but so I don't know if it's going to be dog slow or not, but we'll see.
No, it's probably not. And, Rob brings up a great point. Whenever you've got to do string manipulation, we were talking about using the old instring function in BASIC, but regular expressions are the way to go, man.
Do they use the string builder stuff?
Pardon?
Do they use the string builder object? Do you know?
I haven't seen his code, so I'm not sure what he did to implement.
Just regular expressions in general. A lot of string handling.
Yeah, it's for string handling. I mean, you can basically do pattern matching with it. And I'm certain that's what he did. He probably wrote a regular expression
that's exactly what he did.
That looked for the form of an email address. There's some really good resources out there too for that. O'Reilly wrote a book on using regular expressions. Not O'Reilly. It was published by O'Reilly. Really an old book, but really a great book, Mastering Regular Expressions. And also Dan Appleman has an ebook that really digs into regular expressions as well.
We also did an interview with Scott Hanselman, I think, who gave us just a boatload of regular expression resources that are linked on the site. So if you're interested in that.
Yeah, if you've never seen one, it looks like a cartoon character cursing, but, it's very powerful.
Here's another one that we got from Dan Lee, who says that, hey, Carl and Mark, I'm a big fan. I recently got my VB6 MSCD and need to now learn all things .NET. As a former radio announcer and guitarist, I think, wow, this guy Carl's into the same stuff I'm into, only you've taken it a lot further, so I'm a little jealous. Anyway, I'd like to share my simple method of recording your show. I bought a $49 RCA digital voice recorder at Walmart. It's extremely light and compact and records up to 6 hours. I got a Radio Shack plug that goes from this thing to my sound card, and voila, I can quote-unquote tape the show and listen anywhere. I also use a text-to-speech program from www.readplease.com with this unit. I've listened to tons of stuff that would take me hours to read. I could go on with the kudos, but I'd sound like one of the crazed fans who used to call the radio station, so I'll leave it at that. Keep up the great work, Dan Lee.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one. And one last one here. Two. We got another one here from Vince Blasberg, who says, I just got to let you know, I put the MP3s on 2 or 3 CDs and play them on my commute to and from work. It's a great day when car stereos play 15 MP3s on a CD. My family won't let me play them on our vacation drive tomorrow.
I bet. It'd be like that commercial with the aroma candles in the back seat when everyone went to sleep.
Please turn it off. They just don't know how much .NET rocks. To you and Mark, keep up the good work. All right. Well, this next one here is really long, so I'm going to only pick out a few of these. This is from a guy we gave a shout-out to a while ago from Nigeria, Ibrahim Mohammed. And he goes on with a bunch of stuff, but I'll pick out the good parts. He says, I write to this email to tell you how much I did enjoy your last .NET Rocks episode. I have been praying the day you guys going to go solo. The reason for that was that I realized that you guys would have a lot of technical things to say, but because of time and the invited guests, you would not be allowed to. No offense, Brent. I enjoyed the part about serialization and certification. I'm a big fan of certification because I believe that that's the only way to have a chance of updating IT skills. I don't have any problems if Microsoft or any big IT companies continue to change the way we do things in IT world. When Microsoft released the blueprint of .NET development, people didn't know if Microsoft was saying the truth. Now, after 3 years with various releases of .NET products, everyone was caught by surprise. If today one is not ready to learn about .NET as a developer, then one is missing a lot. And then he goes on to say, I want you to know how I feel about your contribution in evangelizing .NET. I like .NET Rocks a lot and keep it up. You know, I used to be a big fan of Carl and Gary's VB homepage. I'm looking towards building such a website for upcoming developers to use and build themselves on .NET. CGVB has helped me a lot. Now .NET Rocks is also helping. I would continue to be a big fan of .NET and Microsoft technologies. Thank you for taking your time to read my mail. I will be writing in the future to tell you how I feel about .NET, Microsoft technologies, and .NET Rocks. My regards to Mark Dunn, Todd, and the entire crew of Franklin's Net. It was a very touching email, and it went on and on with a lot of cool stuff. So thanks, Ibrahim. And thanks to the listeners for indulging us in a little bit of kudos there.
Absolutely. We love encouraging emails.
Yeah, keep them coming. Well, anyway, let me introduce tonight's guest, Mark. Brent Rector is president and founder of Wise Owl Consulting with over 3 decades experience in software development. Brent has designed and implemented operating systems as well as new computer programming languages and their compilers. Brent started developing Windows applications using Windows 1 Beta in 1985.
Wow.
And has been involved in Windows development ever since. He is the author of numerous Windows programming books, including ATL Internals and Win32 Programming. Besides providing consulting and instruction for the premier .NET developer training organization Wintellect, Brent's own company, Wise Owl Consulting, recently released Demeanor for .NET, the premier code obfuscator for .NET applications. For more information, go to www.wiseowl.com. Brent, hello and welcome to .NET Rocks.
Well, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, Brent, it's good to have you on. You're hardcore, man.
Absolutely.
Going back to Windows 1.0.
You know, you wouldn't believe what we did with Windows 1.0. We We used it to run a $1.5 million piece of hardware.
Wow.
And it did it very reliably, I might add, on a 640 kbyte IBM AT.
Wow.
But, that was then.
I did run a program in Windows 1.0. That was when it was just like a runtime for DOS, right?
Pretty much, graphical user interface for it. We actually, we needed to get into protected mode, so I had to write a little protected mode OS, and it ran a real mode subroutine called Windows 1.0.
Right.
Cool.
Wow.
But I guess some people call that hardcore. I call it fun, personally.
True, it was fun.
Well, you're talking to a Visual Basic programmer at heart here, so
yeah, me too.
anytime you do something that low level, that's hardcore to me.
So I'll turn this around a little bit. Since you're a VB programmer, and I have to ask with, .NET and VB.NET, how do you feel about VB.NET?
Well, Mark, why don't you answer first, and then I've got a big, long-winded answer that I'd like to give.
Well, I love VB.NET. For a while, I did some Delphi programming and was a Delphi instructor for a short run, and came to appreciate object-oriented development when I was doing that. And I was looking forward to the day that I'd really be able to do inheritance with Visual Basic. So I'm very excited about VB.NET. I like C#, but as everybody knows that listens to the show, a case-sensitive language and me just don't get along. I'm just not used to it.
Yeah. Well, my answer is that I love VB. I think in Visual Basic, and when I'm looking to write code and applications and algorithms, I naturally just think in that language. I've programmed in other languages. I've programmed in C++, programmed in assembler, programmed in Pascal for a brief stint, Turbo Pascal, and I've even programmed quite a bit in C#. And I just like VB the best. And a lot of it has to do with productivity. I just feel that I can write cleaner, better, easier to read, easier to understand code faster in VBNet than I can in any other language. So that's how I feel about VBNet.
Right. And let me ask you, Brent, as far as choosing a language, do you really think it matters that much which language you implement your solution in .NET?
Well, I think in general, I would say, yes, because you want to use the best language for the job. With .NET, since you're talking to now a common runtime library, basically the framework, so you have one set of APIs to use regardless of your programming language, then I don't really think it makes so much of a difference given the choices we have today. If you were going to write some sort of batch processing report generating program, I think Cobalt.NET probably would be the best choice.
Oh, that's funny.
If I were doing some sort of, scientific computing, atomic bomb calculations, probably Fortran.NET. But for what we do most day in and day out on PC and on Windows, I don't really think it matters that much whether you use VB or C#. In fact, small set of things that it does better than the other one. Late binding for VB, and you can use pointers and hurt yourself badly in C# if you want to. But, for 80-90% of what most people write day in and day out, there's no real difference. I don't even think in productivity or expressivity in the two languages.
Probably the productivity issue is for me being a VB programmer and expecting a certain level of, intelligence and speed and non-case sensitivity and things like that, having to go, add that level of detail to my thought processes is not something that I'd like to do. So.
Are you aware of any optimizations that, the compilers take advantage of that are different between C# and VB.NET?
I'm not aware of any specific ones. The C# compiler is more mature in the sense that it's a year or two older probably than the VB.NET compiler, just because Microsoft started, and developed the C# compiler sooner. And the majority of the framework itself is written in C#. So I'm sure there's been a lot more work just in man years put into the C# compiler. But there's a really interesting argument that says that it's counterproductive to put effort into optimizing any .NET compiler.
Yeah, I agree.
With the just-in-time compiler, you want to put all your optimizations effort into the JIT process, and then all languages benefit from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Part of Visual Studio itself is written in .NET in managed code as well. So.
Yeah, most of it. Well, Brent, you sent me an email, a few talking points here that you wanted to make, and my eyes immediately went to the last one. Jennifer Aniston. Okay, I'm interested.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have much to talk about her.
We like her.
I keep missing her phone calls every time she calls, but she doesn't call, but I'd hate to believe that, That'd just be depressing. I actually have just only found out about her in the last couple of years since I got my Replay TV. I never was a Friends fan for years, so I'm not catching them for the first time in the last couple of years.
Aha.
Are they about to end the run of Friends? Seems like I heard that somewhere.
Yeah, this is the upcoming season. I think is the last one.
And she's out making movies now, I think.
That's right, but I'm sure she'll hear this discussion and want to give one of us a call.
She'll give you a call, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure she's a diehard listener of .NET Rocks.
I would think so.
Yeah, why not? I mean, who wouldn't want to listen to this great show?
Mainly put that on the list last to see how far you read,
Speaking of people who listen to the show, we recently submitted a proposal to XM Radio. How cool would that be if we got on XM?
Oh, for the satellite radio.
Yeah. So anyway,
I don't have a satellite radio.
I haven't heard back from the XM people, so if you're listening out there, go find an email address. Maybe we'll put a link on the site. And just, bomb them with email requesting that they put .NET Rocks on the satellite radio. So
Right. I don't have a satellite radio either, but if they put our show on, I'm going to get one.
I know a lot of people who would get one if they put the show on. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Maybe you can download code over the radio.
Oh, very cool. Oh, now you got me thinking, Brent.
Uh-oh.
Good.
Wait a minute, I set
Now
up a little
driving now, though.
I set up a little socket service. Yes. No, okay. Hey, Carl here with a couple of quick announcements. We have some changes afoot, lots of big changes afoot at .NET Rocks and Franklin's Net. We're working on lots of cool stuff. First of all, we're going to clean up this website a little bit. We're going to make it so that you don't have to see all of the past shows on the first page, and you can search for the past shows. Also, we're standardizing the audio formats. We're working on that to bring you a concise, constant sound and a selection of audio formats for you to listen to for all the shows. Also, we are moving to a bi-weekly .NET Rock show. That's right. And that means that you're going to have plenty of time now to catch up on your favorite .NET Rocks episodes that you haven't had the time to do as of yet. So, every other week we're going to have a show. Also, I want to mention a couple things that are happening with Franklin's Net classes. We do hands-on training for intermediate level developers who are looking to go to .NET. We do a VB.NET Masterclass. I teach it in New London. Mark Dunn teaches it in Atlanta. We have regular classes scheduled. And also Mark Dunn and Marcy Robillard, the Data Grid girl. That's right, and her talk is coming up here in the next show. They are teaching a new ASP.NET Masterclass. And this is a more web-focused class. In fact, it's all web-focused, whereas the VBNet Masterclass is a little bit more Windows Forms focused. So check it out at www.franklins.net. Hey, this is an incredible. I just spent an hour re-listening to the show, and again I picked up some stuff from Brent that I didn't remember before. This is a great one, folks. Stick around, won't you? Well, one of your talking points I'm very interested in, and it's a topic that we haven't talked about at all on .NET Rocks, and I'm actually very interested in it. Actually, we may have talked a bit about it with Jonathan Zuck, but it's intellectual property. And I know that you're big into code obfuscation. You wrote an obfuscator,
right?
And people are concerned about about that. They have been concerned with Java as well. I mean, Java has the same transparency in terms of looking at decompiled bytecode.
Right.
So do you think this is really an issue? I mean, don't people most of the time want to protect their data rather than their algorithms?
Well, people are really funny about their code. You know, I have people come up to me all the time worried about the problem. Whether they're worried rightly or not is a valid question, I think. And to some degree, I talk to probably hundreds, if not thousands, of developers a year, and I see a lot of the code that's out there. And I think it's already obfuscated in the original source form. So, by and large, I don't think there's a lot of threat to most people there. You know, you still have the people that are concerned. So
self-obfuscating code writing.
That's right. You know.
So
I had one company, and this is they swore this was a true statement. You know, it's one of these stories that you don't want to believe because you would cry if you thought it was really true. But one company, they claimed seriously that a manager no longer with the company had come in over the weekend and decided to speed up their code by deleting all the comments.
Oh man!
And had actually done it, you know. So,
ooh. And
they were serious, you know. I'm going, whoa, you know. So there's
ever heard of a compiler?
Yeah, that's right. It does that for you, you know. So,
well, that's pretty scary.
About .NET code, I said, well, it's true that what goes in your binary is everything that's in your source code, with the exception of your comments, if you have them, and the names of your local variables.
Yeah.
Everything else is in the binary, and there are a lot of tools that you can go out on the internet for free to a lot of different websites and run decompilers. And in fact, you can take VB code and translate it to C# or C# to VB or whatever.
I remember in the old days of VB4, some guys had written a VB4 decompiler.
Or was it VB3, I think.
Was it VB3?
Yeah,
P code before
or it was P code. That's what they called it.
VB4 was the last P code VB. Anyway, the compiler came along with version 5 and then version 6 in Visual Basic, and after that it didn't work. But I remember, maybe VB3, but definitely VB4. I remember that. And a lot of people were really concerned, really concerned. But I don't know. And this is the issue I brought up again. Is this really an issue? Because have there ever been cases? Let me ask you this: have there ever been cases where somebody has written some code and put it out there, either in the public domain or sold commercial software, and somebody else has said, "Yeah, I think I'll do that," decompile it, change some colors, and slap their own name on it, and actually try to get away? I mean, that seems to be a really ballsy move to me.
Well, you know, within the U.S., I think it would be difficult because of all the legal repercussions. But, of course, now we have the net and everything's international. You might be in a position where you can't really preclude that. I really think the advantage to obfuscation or any technique that slows people down from stealing your code is more for your competitors and just to slow them down. I know some people that have worked a long time reverse engineering a piece of code. When I go, you know, if you just sat down with a blank sheet of paper, you could have probably invented something that did the same functionality in half the time.
Right.
So it's somewhat mistaken, I think. But then by the same token, one of the customers that I went to and did some consulting for, they said they had an internet product and it was some sort of game system or something that required you to log into their servers. And they said within 7 days after they released the .NET code, somebody had hacked it and taken out the login authentication part.
Wow.
Now, part of that was probably a poor design in the first place, but so there are certainly some people out there doing it. But, you know, I look at something like Office. If Microsoft released the source code to Office, now, I've never seen it. I don't really know how big it is, but my guess would be it's in the hundreds of thousands of lines, maybe a million lines of code. That's pretty much self-obfuscated, even with comments.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who's going to figure that out?
Right. You know, you just don't have the motivation to do it. And like you say, the only thing you could do is like steal it in MOS and modify a tiny little thing to put your name on the top instead of Office, and you're going to get caught pretty soon doing that.
So I guess what I hear you saying is that it's more like algorithms that that do a particular thing that your competitors are trying to do, and you've done it and you figured it out, and you want to slow down your competitors from picking up that particular.
Yeah, it's really just a slow down thing. Nothing you can do, and this includes shipping 8086 binary. If you ship your code to an end user, they can install it on their computer, then you have no secrecy if the end user wants badly enough to steal it. I know one day, just sort of for fun, a company pissed me off. And
Okay.
it was a firewall, a product that I had bought and I was using, and it just didn't do something right. And I complained, and they basically said, we're not going to fix it. So I thought, okay, I can fix this. So it was about a week of effort. This was a kernel device driver, a network device driver. And in a week of effort, I decompiled it by hand back into the C program, C source code, changed it to do what I wanted, and installed the new version and was running it, which I felt perfectly satisfied with doing since I own that copy. And so this is x86 native code, kernel device drivers even, and it took me a whole week to do.
Right.
So not everybody would do that probably, but still, the idea that just because you shipped it compiled code as opposed to .NET IL or bytecode doesn't really, I think it gives you more of an illusion of security than any real security.
Right.
.NET makes it easier, but it's just easier. It's a matter of degree. Now, one thing that people miss about, for example, code obfuscation is it shrinks the size of your programs by, I'd say an average of 15 to 20%. So, for example, I have a code obfuscator product that we market, and I ran it on Microsoft System.Windows.Forms DLL just as a test case, really. And it's a 2 megabyte assembly, and it drops by 200K bytes in size.
Wow.
So the reason is you have all the original programmer symbols in your file, and if you're a good programmer, you use long, meaningful symbols.
Right.
And so all those long, meaningful symbols make it into your file. But at runtime, the runtime doesn't care whether the symbol's a long, meaningful name or the letter A. And so what a lot of the products do is they take out your long, meaningful names and put in short, meaningless names.
Right.
For a Pocket PC or a compact framework device, this provides a significant memory savings.
Right, I was going to say, you probably derive some performance benefit from that just because you've got a lower memory footprint, faster load time for the assembly.
That's right. So you get a smaller working set, you're hitting fewer pages, so you're thrashing the disk less. You have smaller image on disk. So there are a number of benefits. I'm not sure that on regular desktop devices it adds up to a heck of a lot anymore. I don't know.
Right.
I come from the days where 100K bytes was a lot of memory.
This is what I call 90s thinking, Brent.
Yeah.
And we really have to unlearn it. It's no longer are we worried about milliseconds and nanoseconds and.
Well, I do have an Itanium 2 here with 2 gigabytes of RAM. So I'm not thinking that way in some ways, but it's like, but that Itanium 2 could use that 10K bytes.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned programming mobile devices. That kind of swings us back around to having to worry about not having the luxury of all these resources on a desktop machine. So, I think programmers that are especially doing mobile solutions, that they are going to worry about things like that.
Good point.
And that's, totally independent of the obfuscation aspect of it. But then, coming back to the intellectual property again, any of the tools, the commercial tools to do obfuscation cost in the order of $1,000, maybe a little bit more. And if you've just spent $1 million to develop your software product, and $1,000 extra investment can slow down your competitors by 6 months, seems cheap.
Well, that's assuming you spent $1 million to develop your software.
Well, the one guy shops. If they've spent $1 million, they should have been doing something else with that million.
They should call me. That's what they should do.
Hey, after they call me.
That's right. One thing about obfuscators that I've noticed is that they do things differently. And, there's like a community-level obfuscator that does some simple symbol replacement and, code pointer scrambling. And there's other things that do more strong kind of encryption and other more heinous techniques.
Right.
Now, some of that stuff can maybe slow things down, no?
It can. For example, the freebie obfuscator that comes with Visual Studio, it basically just renames things, and that's all it does. That company's commercial version and my commercial version and some others. For example, we have an option called string encryption. All of the major companies do. And what it does is it goes in and takes your string literals and encrypts them so that if somebody brings up the IL disassembler or runs a tool on it, you can't just search and say, oh, here's where it puts out the invalid password, try again message. Because that's a big clue on where you should probably look first if you're trying to decompile something.
But then again, how do those strings get decrypted on the fly at runtime?
Yep, that's the whole problem. Any piece of software where it decrypts something, it means that the decryption key is built into the program somewhere.
And it's there for the finding.
So it's just a matter of time till somebody can find it,
yeah.
And now they have all the strings decrypted.
Yep.
So again, it's just one additional hurdle that somebody reverse engineering your product has to go through. And is it valuable or not? Well, it only takes a microsecond or so to decrypt the string literal, the way we do it, for example, and you don't notice any. Theoretically, there's a performance impact, but in any realistic program I've measured, you can't measure it.
If you're doing a heavy string programming in a loop, you may see a performance.
You might, yeah. And there are ways to code around that because it only affects your string literals, not your string variables.
Oh, I see. Oh, good.
So, basically most of your processing isn't affected by it at all.
Right, and that would just have to decrypt once anyway when it loads in memory.
That's right.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
But the decryption key is there. It has to be there. And then there are other techniques that people use for intellectual property. For example, it's somewhat ironic that a trivial modification of any .NET program can crash most disassembly tools, including Microsoft's IL disassembler.
Wow.
So a lot of companies have options where, want me to generate an assembly that crashes IL-DASM?
That's interesting.
It's sort of a good thing, bad thing.
Right.
It's easy to do, but if you ask .NET, is this a valid assembly, it'll say no.
Oops.
They get away with it because by default, assemblies that load from your local hard drive don't have to get verified.
Brent, would I gain any benefit from running the engine utility and making something a native exe?
Good question.
Yeah, that's actually really counterintuitive. People always think, well, if I run the engine utility on my assembly, it generates a pure 8086 assembly.
Yeah, that's
But now
not
you
true.
have two DLLs to load where before you only had one. And you can't get rid of the original one. The native code version has the JITted 8086 executable code, but .NET programs will not run without the original metadata.
Right, and also it doesn't. It also has to still go through the security checks and all the other things before it will run the native code. It just doesn't compile it. Is that right?
It compiles it, and if you put the engine assembly in something like the GAC, all the security checks are done when the assembly is inserted into the global assembly cache.
Right.
So they don't have to be done every time it's run from the GAC.
But with code access security, I thought the security checks have to do with who's running the code at the time it's being run, no?
Actually, the security checks for CAS, code access security, are mostly what is the code and where did it come from, not who is running it, because that's the Win32 security model. So yeah, those things, security checks on like, can you call this function, can you access that resource, those still go on whether you're in Gen or not.
We're going to have to talk about that a little more, because I was under the impression that the code access security looked at the role that the user was. Maybe it's role-based security. I think I may get my terms mixed up. But part of the security model in .NET will actually walk the stack up, looking at the credentials of the caller who called the function, and then based on the local policy, will give you a yes or no depending on where that where the code came from and other things.
Well, it's slightly off a little bit. It does the code access security basically. We divide security domains up into the assemblies. Every assembly can have a different set of security permissions granted to it. So when .NET loads a DLL or an EXE, it basically comes up with a bunch of evidence about that assembly. It came from this URL,
yes,
or it came from the C drive. It has this strong name. It has this VeriSign certificate attached. Anyway, it comes with all these facts, and then it goes to the security policy on your system and says, based upon these facts, which are called security evidence, what permissions does security policy give this particular DLL? And it comes up with a set, what's called the permission grant set.
Okay, and that has nothing to do with the security context of the caller.
Of the user, not of the user that's running the process.
That's what I mean. The user.
So yeah. So now, if you have two DLLs, A and B, both run, like one a function in A calls into B, you have a set of security permissions that code in A is allowed to do. You could theoretically have different security permissions that code in B is allowed to do.
Yeah.
And so let's say that A is a malicious Trojan horse program, a worm or a virus or something, and it's enticed, called the luring attack, it's enticed B into doing its evil deed for it, because B is a trusted piece of code. So A calls.
This is like
B
Star Wars, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
So what happens basically is when you call into .NET, into the runtime, and you ask it to do something that is a secured operation like opening a file or reading a registry key or even just reading an environment variable, .NET will actually say, I wonder if you have permission to open this file. And so .NET will look up the call stack and say, which assembly called me asking me to open the file? And it'll say, B called. B's trusted. We don't mind that.
Okay.
Who called B? And then it walks up the stack again and says, A, I don't trust A at all. A didn't have permissions to ask for files to be opened. And it blows the request away.
And that's different from role-based security, which is basically your code checking the role.
That's correct.
Yeah. I get it. Oh,
And it matters what zone the code is running from, too, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the pieces of evidence on where the code loaded. It's unfortunate today, I think, that the security policy for .NET is such that if the code comes from what's called the local computer zone, which by default means if it came off your hard drive,
if you installed it
gets permissions to do anything it wants to.
Yeah, I agree. That's not very good.
Now, future versions, I'm sure, will change this. It doesn't make sense to leave it this way.
All you have to do is download a zip, or a setup exe and run it locally, and you've got full permission.
That's right.
So even though
turn to the dark side before you know it.
So even though, the user allowed it to run, the user doesn't know what code is written in there, and we're back to the old problem of, do you want to open this attachment? Hey, it may completely ruin your computer. Yes or no?
That's right. Now, you can change this. Since I'm a developer and I run lots of code from lots of people sometimes, I have a whole section of my hard drive where I've altered the default security policy. And when I put .NET applications there, it's actually C:\sandbox. Anything from there or down, I've configured. You don't get any permissions to do anything.
That's cool.
And then if I don't trust some code, I'll put it there. I'll run it from there. I'll see why it blows up. What was it trying to do?
That's very cool.
That'd be a great magazine article to write, Brent, how to configure a sandbox on your local machine.
It still requires some a knowledgeable user at the keyboard to actually put that zip file down into that directory, though. So.
Well, Brent, I got to tell you, that's probably the best concise explanation of code access security I may have ever heard from anybody.
Agreed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Most people don't quite grasp it. I know it took me a long time to get my head around it because it's quite different from, say, the Windows security model, where it's who are you? If you're an admin, you can do everything. If you're a guest, you can't. You know?
And you can do that yourself in your code just by looking at the role that the calling context is in.
Sure. And .NET security works on top of Windows security too. So even if .NET security gives you the right to overwrite this file, if you've got a Windows access control on it so that you can't, then it won't be overwritten anyway. So they actually are complementary in many ways.
I'm taking a look at some of the cool stuff this month online at the MSDN magazine site. That's msdn.microsoft.com/msdnmag. And I'm in particular looking at the Advanced Basics column, which Ken Spencer writes every month. And these are some advanced VB.NET topics. And what he's doing this month is creating a Windows Form application that creates graphical text on the fly. This is a really useful thing to do, especially for websites. This is a trick that I've learned with ASP.NET websites. When you create a JPEG file that has your email address in it, instead of typing out your email address in raw text, you make a little JPEG of it on the fly, and then those robot programs can't sniff the email addresses off your pages very easily anyway, without using optical character recognition. Anyway, that's just one of many advanced basic columns that's up there. It's the current one. You can, of course, search all the archives for other things that Ken has showed you how to do. Let's now get back to Brent Rector on .NET Rocks. I don't know, are you excited? I'm excited. Well, the next talking point that really jumps out at me is remoting. And we've talked with a few people about remoting. We have talked with, let's see, Rocky Latka. Woohoo, Mark?
Ingo Rammer.
Ingo Rammer, yep, in detail. Rocky Latka.
Right.
Javal Lowy talked a bit about remoting. We even had the one of our success stories, Troy Girton, talk about a remoting application that he wrote and deployed. And works very well. So, what do you got to say about it?
Well, the thing I would tell everybody about remoting right now is that it's not a replacement for current technologies, really. People all come up to me and say, okay, instead of DCOM, I can use .NET remoting, or instead of web services, I can use remoting, or should I use remoting? And the trouble is, my analogies all go back, a decade or two, so nobody ever understands them. But, remoting is like RPC.
You lost me.
Yeah, there you go. See?
No, I know. I'm just kidding.
I'm out of luck. Remoting today in .NET is great, and it's relatively efficient, and it's extremely easy to get up and running. But it's just not missing a huge amount of useful features. For example, authentication. There's no authentication on the remoting channel in .NET today. So
you have to write it yourself.
You would have to write it yourself, and that is a non-trivial thing to do. You will get it wrong.
Have you seen anybody with tools for remoting authentication?
No. Word is that, something better will be coming down in the future, but I don't know what that is yet. I've not seen it. Right now, remoting is a good way to take a method call from a client machine and run the method on an object on a server machine in a trusted environment. So if you're in a server farm and you're doing the back end, your web server wants to communicate to your database server or something like that, remoting's really good and no problems as long as you're behind that firewall. But there's no kind of authentication, so there's no way for a remoting server to know who's calling it with a request. And
right.
There's no encryption short of running over SSL
Or doing your own.
HTTPS. So there's all of those issues and there's nothing like transactions if you're doing COM+ or database type stuff where you want to. It's a horrible idea. I hate to even say this, but if you want to initiate a transaction on a client system and propagate it to a back-end system, more reasonably would be to take it off the web server and propagate it to the database server. But any of that transaction flow semantics, none of that's supported by remoting.
Well, now Ingo Rammer has in his book, Advanced Remoting in VB.NET, a couple of sections on doing your own custom syncs.
Yes, right.
And he has a sync that does encryption and a sync that does compression.
Right.
And just puts them in line and forget about them.
The remoting architecture in .NET is extremely elegant. I'm in awe of the design. It's unfortunate that it's now been undocumented by Microsoft.
Yeah.
And it's apparently going away.
No, what?
They're, going away in the sense that they'll probably have something better.
Okay.
.NET remoting was documented. The architecture was initially documented, and that's how people learned about the syncs. And
yeah, I think it's pretty rudimentary. In other words, early, and not very polished.
Well, there's a lot of people are switching, and the industry as a whole are switching to standard based things. So there are all these efforts, and they're not even completed yet, like WS security and WS transaction,
right.
for web services security and transaction, and probably some future remoting architecture will need to support those standards because that'll be interoperable with other platforms, not just Windows as well.
Well, they already are, SOAP and HTTP, so you can basically do web services over remoting.
You can, but there's a big difference between web services and remoting. Web services deal with a very, relatively speaking, primitive type system. It
right.
deals in data types that you can send back and forth in XML. And
right.
remoting deals with .NET data types. So you can literally pass a parameter on a remoting method call that's a .NET hash table instance. But you couldn't do that on a web services.
Well, I've done web services where I've used a binary formatter to serialize an object into a byte array and just return the byte array.
Sure, you can do that.
Yeah, it's a little extra work, and it does what remoting does internally. You're doing now externally, but
of course, now you're also assuming that you have .NET on both ends.
That's right, and then which begs the question: why are you using web services?
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask that. I was going to be more polite. I am the guest here. So.
Well, it's been an issue. Microsoft is now getting in gear to rebrand the word .NET to things that just have to deal with web services and web services, web services, web services. And by the way, did we mention web services?
Yeah, right. I hate that.
Well, I get Microsoft has vision. Let's give them credit for vision. Now, maybe we just don't see it because the current version of web services is it's good, it's getting there. But, if this is where they're going to be pouring their research and development and making them faster, making them more secure, making them this, making them that, who knows? Maybe someday, usage-wise and usefulness-wise, they'll outdo remoting.
Well, possibly. They have a long way to go.
That's true.
Remoting basically is based on HTTP and XML. And if you use TCP in the binary formatter for remoting, it's about 6 to 8 times faster.
Yeah, I've seen 3 to 4, depending. Unless you're using data sets.
Well, data sets, then it's about the same.
About the same. Probably a little slower, actually.
Yeah, since data sets are all XML anyway, regardless of what you do.
And the funny thing isn't data sets supposedly the center of the universe data-wise in .NET land? So
supposedly. I should probably learn those things one of these days. I keep hearing that.
It's we're sort of chasing our tail a bit.
I have never used a data set.
Data sets are cool.
It's a record set on steroids.
That's what I hear, and it's a whole programming model in its own right from what I read. But
that's true, yeah.
Well, the most common question I get from students whenever we talk about remoting or web services is, should I consider remoting over web services to optimize the speed at which things happen? And I think from what I'm hearing you say, you may give up being able to authenticate, but I'm not so sure that web services often offer us authentication anyway, above what you would get with remoting. So it may be a good argument to look into remoting if speed is a big concern.
Well, remoting, as I said, is a great way to take a method call. You call some object on a client and take the parameters, forward them to the representation of that object on the server, and execute over there and get the answer back. That's all it does. And as long as that's what you want to do, you don't care about hiding the data as it goes back and forth or any of the security aspects. Remoting is so easy to do. When I give a remoting talk, I have my this is the hard way to do it. That's 5 lines of code. I spend like 40 minutes talking about what those 5 lines of code do.
Yeah.
And then you turn around and say, and the easy way is load this config file and you're done.
Yeah, that's basically what I do.
Yeah. So, and then you feel bad at the end of the day. Okay, an hour and a half, and I just talked about 6 lines of code.
Well, what they didn't know is that it took you like 10 days to figure out the capitalization of the config file entries.
I hate those config file bugs.
Damn it, they suck.
The errors are like, you screwed up, and I'm not going to tell you why.
Yeah, that's right. The error is like incompatible version. What?
Right. I only have one version, and it's not even running yet.
I didn't capitalize an L, and I get an incompatible version error.
I hate those. I have my remoting test case that works, and I start from that.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's what the remoting toolkit is all about. That's on our website at www.franklinsnet/.net. That's just a little config file snippet and some code for the client using HTTP, IIS, binary formatter. Works.
Right. Once you start with a working one and you're home free.
Yeah. It took me so long to get one working, though. It was infuriating.
Brent, we haven't asked you where you're from and what kind of things you're doing with your company, Wise Owl Consulting.
Well, I'm located down in San Diego, so mostly across the country from you guys.
Lucky bastard.
Weather's not too bad here ever. So.
Not too bad. It's awesome. Probably the best weather in the country.
Well, I grew up in Indiana, and the company I worked for back in 1978 sent me to California for training for 3 weeks in January once.
He didn't come back.
I never did come back, actually. I asked the company that I trained at, do you guys have any openings? And literally, my car, I went home, drove my car here, and the car hasn't left the state since. So
Jeez.
I do all the time, unfortunately, on airplanes.
What does Wise Owl Computing do?
Well, mostly I do training and consulting. So there are a lot of big companies around here, HP, and HP's getting real big into .NET development. And so I go in there occasionally, help them out, or they help me out, depending on how you look at it. And I do training all around the world. So mostly, Wise Owl's just me. I'm a one-guy place. And between that, we're getting into the software product business with our code obfuscator, which is doing real well. I can sort of keep track of what the .NET market is like and how many people are developing for it based upon how well that's doing.
So how much is it and what makes it better than everyone else's?
Well, the commercial version's $1,450.
That's the sound of angina from Carl.
I'm sorry.
Hey, I got to make a return on my investment.
That's true.
So it actually makes your code so that it doesn't decompile back into compilable C#.
That's good.
Once you've obfuscated it, while there's nothing that will keep you from, saying, running ILDASM and getting an IL source file on it, you will not be able to get compilable C# back out of it. Mostly because, I don't know how many people realize this, but .NET itself, when we're talking the runtime here, can do a heck of a lot more than even the C# language permits. It turns out that C# probably allows you to do only about 70% of the things that you can actually do if you're writing IL code yourself.
See that, Mark? I told you C# wasn't always cracked up to be.
Yeah.
Right, real programmers write IL. Come on
That's
now.
right.
They use Notepad.
Hey, I like Visual Notepad.
Yeah, well, made me a lot of money in the 90s.
So one of the things that my obfuscator does is deliberately take your binary, because it doesn't really care what language you're in. I'm all working at the IL level, and alters it so that you get the same effect, but I use as many constructs as possible that are present in .NET that C# and VB don't support. For example, it's possible at the .NET level to have a field in your class called A. Okay, great. But it turns out at the .NET level, you can have a double called A, an integer called A float called A string called A, int32 unsigned called A.
Wow.
And you can have upper and lowercase too, but we won't go there because we know your opinion on that.
Jeez.
That's all right.
Well, if C# doesn't allow you to overload fields based upon their data type, but .NET does.
Wow.
VB doesn't either. So when you decompile your program, you have all these fields all called A, and the C# compiler goes, which A were you talking about? You have 17 of them now.
You have a little bit of a collision problem there.
A little bit. And then there's things that people don't really realize. .NET doesn't know about properties and events and enumerations. They don't really exist in some senses. They're all smoke and mirrors that the compilers use.
Huh.
.NET knows about fields and methods. End of story.
Right. And that's what the handlers, the event handlers, the subscription idea is all about, right?
All those
Subscribing to
event
events.
keyword and all the property keywords, all they do is spit out properties, or fields and methods under the covers. So since now if you're going to compile against an assembly, you like to have these high-level things like events and properties. But if all you're doing is running the binary, you don't need them anymore. So one of the things my tool does is it goes in and strips them out of your program.
Wow, that's cool.
So you end up getting a program that's as close to the assembly language level as possible when you get done. Doesn't mean people can't reverse engineer it, like I said before, but it does make it a lot harder.
What other methods of, say, obfuscation do you use other than, we know that you use renaming. We know that, do you do code pointer scrambling, like put gotos in there?
We don't actually do that. I have the capability in there. Actually, I've never enabled it in my commercial product because I don't really believe in it. This is called control flow obfuscation.
Right.
It turns out that the better software developer you are, the less it helps you. It turns out you cannot do it across, say, exception handling boundaries. So if you have a try block, you can do it within the try block, but not across the try catch boundary.
Okay, well that kind of makes sense.
If you have small modular methods with, 6 assignments in a row, how the heck do you scramble that kind of control flow? There is none.
And you say your tool does encryption, string encryption.
It does string encryption. It does metadata obfuscation. It basically will play with your properties and methods. It'll either obfuscate them or just totally remove them so they no longer exist in your file.
And generally, performance is faster, right?
Pretty much, the size is about 20% smaller, which should give you a small performance increase. And generally speaking, otherwise, performance is identical to the pre-obfuscated version.
Wow, this is a good deal.
Now, the other thing that we do that most of them don't is what we call entire application obfuscation. A lot of the tools just look at one DLL and obfuscate it. Well, you can't change any of the entry points into the DLL, any of the public classes or the public methods, because you have EXEs linking to those names. But if you point our product, Demeanor, at a whole set of assemblies, we'll actually obfuscate everything, and then if we said, we changed calculate interest rate to Q, we'll track down every place that references it and changes the reference to Q as well. So we throw away all symbols.
Wow.
Well, I'd say that'll separate you from the field. I would think that would be necessary.
And you basically end up getting better better obfuscation because we look at the whole ball of wax. In fact, we basically pretend to be the .NET runtime, load every assembly, including MS Corelib and System Windows Forms and anything you use, analyze the whole thing, and then spit out your new assemblies. That was a massive pain to do.
Wow. Well, it sounds like a great tool.
Sounds like it's worth $1,400.
Yeah, I would say so.
Well, Borland's now shipping a cut-down version of it with their new C# Builder product as well. So Borland actually thought quite highly of it. In fact, they're using the tool internally as well.
Brent, you writing any books for .NET?
I am writing a .NET book. It's basically on an upcoming operating system of Microsoft. So Longhorn, we've talked about Longhorn. You know, people know it exists. So that book will come out when Longhorn comes out.
Oh, okay.
I'm not holding my breath, though.
Good.
But that's the only one going on right now. So.
Well, our time is almost up. Do you have any last-minute words of wisdom to impart on the listening audience?
Jennifer, if you're listening, give me a call. Other than that, no. I think .NET is the happening place to be, and I'm really glad I'm in this.
Mark, you still alive?
Yeah, I'm having a bit of a coughing attack.
Oh, I see.
I'll recover.
Get eating some of that red dirt. I told you not to do that.
They kick it up a notch, a little garlic.
All right, you guys. This is where we say goodbye. Brent, thank you very much for coming on and enlightening us. I really want you to know that I think that was the best explanation of code access security I've heard in 5 minutes in my entire career. So, thank you.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Looking forward to the next time.
All right.
Good night.
Life is hard. Pay my taxes.